Okay. So I'm going to start in on making a series of tutorials about using Cavalry. This fancy, new, awesome 2D animation program built by the folks that did MASH within Maya that I just loved using. Still there, they just don't develop any new stuff for it. Anyways, so in class today, I did a little overview. It was kind of similar to my video that I made about comparisons of computational thinking and writing code in processing or open processing, P5.js, and doing things procedurally within a program where you don't write code, at least 99% of the time. You wouldn't write code in here, but you're still using similar ideas. So in that previous video, I went kind of quickly just to show the ideas. I'm going to try to break this up and just explain how this works for my students that want to try to use this for their final project in my class this semester. So very quickly, the interface here, pretty straightforward and simple. Certainly compared with other programs like Maya or something like that, this is pretty accessible. We have an asset window here. I just have a composition. We could import image files or other things in here. I could have multiple compositions that I would layer and stack like I might do in After Effects. We have a viewport, canvas, your project window, however you want to look at this, where we do our work. We have a color picker, some various palettes over here, pretty spare, not much going on. And we have these elements here, these shapes and things that we can create or draw into our scene. We're going to use just a few of those. Very important, the attribute editor. So the various elements, objects, behaviors, whatever, that we would create in Cavalry will get loaded in here. I'll talk about how to manage this when we have multiple objects and multiple elements loaded in this, and we want to make connections. And then we have a scene window, again, very much like After Effects, where we'd have like a layer, and we can see these tracks that are created when we do animation. So I'm going to start with do something similar to what I did both in the kind of overview tutorial and what I did in class today. Again, to kind of go over some of these basics, and then I'll probably do several subsequent follow-up tutorials that cover other ideas or concepts. And again, trying to build those off of what we've done in the coding class. So the very first thing in Cavalry is, we want to make a thing, right? We need an element, we need a shape to work with. And for a lot of things in Cavalry, it likes the Option key or the Alt key on the PC. So if I hold down Option, I'm working on a Mac here, I'll just go ahead and create an ellipse here, right? So this shows up down in the scene window. We can see that it kind of has this track. This is basically like a visibility track. This is when this thing will be in the scene. Actually, could modify this. Like as I scrub through here, this object only becomes visible when the track is colored, right? So I'll just leave that. I'm not going to edit with that for now. So it is down here, and then its attributes are listed over here. And lots of different programs use attribute lists if you've used Maya or Blender or any of these 3D programs, right? And a lot of them have multiple components. They have common elements, and then they have their unique elements for a shape. In Maya, this would be a transform node and a shape node, right? A transform node would be position, rotation, scale, and pivot. So to exist in this canvas, right, in this viewport, even though this is just two-dimensional, I still have to know where it is in X, Y coordinates. I need to know if it has any rotation, what its scale is. And again, remember, 1 basically means 100%. So if I put, well, I'll come to this later. So the scale is like a multiplier of the more specific things that usually come later, and we'll see this multiple times in this, will come later for this element, right? So position, rotation, scale, and pivot, you can imagine that would be the same for a circle or a pentagon or a star shape or a rectangle. And there's some other things here about the deformers and filters. Just forget those for now. Motion blur. But you can see we have a shape type, right? This is an ellipse. And the things that define what an ellipse is, its width and height for its radius, and basically how the components are set up. Those would be different than, say, making this a rectangle, right? A rectangle does not have a radius. It has width and height, right, that would define that, but it doesn't go around. And of course, we can have a corner radius and things like this that we could change on the shape. So I'm just going to start with the, where is it? Oh, ellipse. I kept looking for circle. It's my bad. We can modify parts of this, right? So I could make this an ellipse. Non-symmetrical circle, right? I could make it a true ellipse. Here it's an ellipse that's a circle. If I hold down the option, well, if I just click over the word itself, you can see I can scrub through there. Any of these input fields, I can scrub in here and change these and move in these directions. In this case, I could also just type into it and say, hey, be 50 by 50, right? I could make that side. I could also, if I hold down the option key while I click and slide side to side with my trackpad here, you can see that the two of these will be constrained together. But for this example, I'm just going to make it 50 by 50. There's also another way to connect these, and we'll do that later. It also has fill and stroke. I'm going to just choose a red, kind of using something that's a little bit closer to our Texas Tech red, because why not, right? I'll just use this there. Okay, and a stroke. I'm not going to get in this, but we could turn it on. There's lots of different things we could do to modify, like a stroke that it's like a dashed line. We can do things with that. But I'm not going to worry about that for now. Okay, so you have a shape, but what do you want to do with the shape? Thing that Cavalry just intuitively wants to do a lot of the time. It's just willing itself. It's willing the user to please duplicate me, right? Please put a duplicator system into this. So I have an ellipse, and up here and it's selected. Up at the top here, we have the button for the duplicator. I'm sure it's probably under. There it is. Under shapes, we have a duplicator here. So, we can get to many of these things looking up in the menus up above. I'm not going to do that most of the time. Right here, we have the hotkey for this. So create a duplicator. Any selected shapes will automatically be added as input shapes for the duplicator. So I'll go ahead and do that. And you can see that they lined up perfectly in a grid that just happened almost by accident because I made this 50 by 50. And based on what the size of the grid is, right? So a radius of 50 is a diameter of 100. So this is how this is spaced out. So again, a duplicator object, you can see I have the ellipse shape. It's over here in the attribute editor. I have the duplicator is now loaded in there. The ellipse shape actually has been turned off. It's no longer visible. You can't see it because it's at the exact point of this duplicated ellipse, but it's there. But when I select that and I make a duplicator, Cavalry immediately hides that object, right? So this is like the prototype for the cloner system or the duplicator system. It has position, rotation, scale, and pivot as well, but most of the time we won't mess with those with the duplication system. But then it has its own things, right? So it's not an ellipse trying to have a radius, it's a duplication system, and we can tell it which way we would want this to duplicate. We could do one of these Fibonacci scales. Boy, I'm just not going to get into each one of these. Open up a can of worms. I'll come back to that, right? You could do a linear row, but I'm just going to do a grid. Okay, and then I can modify the individual shapes and positions and that. We're going to deal with that later. The thing I care the most about is this distribution system. So we have the count 3 by 3. You can see as I'm increasing the numbers, it's not they're not spacing out, right? They're overlapping each other, because this just says the fit mode is to take however many duplicates they are and put them on top of each other, if that happens to be the size, the scaling of it, so that the count is 5 and the outer distance would be 200 by 200. So I could manually try to scale that, or even better, I'm going to say instead of fit, let's just go by step. So these will fit together. In fact, I'm just going to put 100 by 100. And then I'm going to increase the grid, the number of copies, right, that I'm making, just enough so that it goes off the canvas and enough off there. Okay. So again, the duplicator used this so many times. Most of the stuff up here you're going to leave alone. Like maybe there's some instances in the where you might want to mess with these, but certainly right off the bat, don't mess with this stuff and just deal with what is the distribution type. You can change it from grid to all these others. I'll do some quick hit tutorials later about just the duplication system. And then we have these shape positions we'll see in a minute. Okay. I'm going to just add a couple more, and then I'll call this it for this tutorial. The other part that's important here, when I did the little rollover, it said create a duplicator. Any selected shapes will automatically be added as input shapes for the duplicator, right? And you can see within its attributes here, we have something called the input shape. And you can see this little yellow highlight. I'm going to talk about this later in the second tutorial. But if I click on this, you can see there is the ellipse shape. And it's actually identified. There's one shape in here. But remember that in arrays or lists, computers like to count from 0, right? So there would be one thing starting the counting at 0 and 1 and 2 and 3. So element 0 is this ellipse shape. Let's go ahead and create a second shape. So I'm going to hold down just Option, and I'll go over and, I think I did this in class. I created the star. And I'm just going to make the fill for this one. I made a kind of horrible yellow color in class. I'm just going to make this black. And the shape itself had a radius of 100. I'm going to make this for now something closer to 50. Because that's the radius that I had set up for the circle, the ellipse. All right, so I've created this star shape. What I would like to do is go back to my duplicator and add it to that duplication system and talk about how we can have multiple copies here. As you can see, though, each time I created one of these things, it loaded in the attribute editor, right? I have multiple, and sometimes that's a good thing. You'll notice for each one of these little items, don't worry about some of these other buttons, but we don't need to look at the flow chart, things like that for this object. We can pin things, and we can also just get rid of them, not delete them, but unload them from the attribute editor. So say if I just click that, you can see the star shape goes away, the ellipse goes away, all these go away. If I had, in fact, let's click on all three of them again. So if I have all three of them in there, and really what I want to do is look at just the duplicator and have it loaded in attribute editor. Again, if I hold down the Option or Alt key and double click on that item, Cavalry, and I say this with a hotkey because it's something you could do a lot in Cavalry, is just load the one that I want into the system, right? So it basically removes everything from the attribute editor by holding on the Alt, and then loads that thing which I double clicked on. So I have the duplicator, and I have this star shape down here, and you'll notice this all over the place, right? Again, we talked about this in class. So anything that has a little circle with a little blue rollover, anything that's highlighted blue means I am willing to be connected to something else, right? So these are little connection ports, if you would say, if you want to think about it that way. You can also think of it as an equal sign, that something over here is willing to be added or equal to drive or be driven by something, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But what I really want to do is just take this star shape itself, like the thing, right? And if I just click and drag, and I'll just do that I'll just click and drag over here to the duplicator, as I showed in class. Nothing is highlighted. It's all kind of grayed out, with the exception of input shape. So a Cavalry tries to let you know, hey, I'm willing to make that connection. That'll work for me. And if that's not a good idea, to say, hey, here's a whole entire shape to drive the scale, well, what I'm trying to say is this: all this shape is equal to something. The shape for the scale, it would want a number, right? And that's not what I'm passing along. So, but input shape says, yeah, I'm willing to be connected to other shapes. So we'll go ahead and put that in there. And you can see the input shape number has changed to 2. And if I click on the little yellow, right, again, this yellow is saying that there's a connection, right? And you can see if I click on that, there's the first element, element 0, and element 1. So there are 2 items in there. And we have the ellipse and then the star. So they're in the duplication system, but I didn't see the star. So where did the star go? Well, the duplicator looks at the index, right? It looks for an ID. And right now, the ID down here says, let's duplicate item 0. Look at that. Item 0 is the ellipse shape. The star shape is number 1. So what happens if I were to change the shape ID for the duplicator system, right, to 1? Oh, so patriotic, I guess, right? You can say I now have black stars everywhere. That's kind of weird. Very graphic, straightforward. It's kind of interesting. But you notice a couple things. There is that star shape. Remember, I told you it's kind of hanging out there. It didn't get hidden. When we created the duplicator with the ellipse shape, it did that for us. This time we created a star shape by itself without doing the fancy way, connecting it to the duplicator. We made the connection itself, but it doesn't turn off visibility, so I'm just going to go ahead and do that, right? So I can toggle it on and off. So now I have that in there, but really what I want, I'm going to create an animation as I did in class. What we want to do is randomize this. So I'm going to come over to the shape ID, and this you can do this for any one of these attributes in here. If you just right-click on it, you can set a keyframe. There's other things that you can add. You can copy the value. A lot of time, certainly as you get going and experimenting, you can add a behavior. So you can mix behaviors, or blend shape is like a morph thing. Noise, we're going to talk about. You can just create a value, so we could just drive a different value into the value here. There's a reason why you would want to do that, but we're just going to use random. And so what we see now is that the shape ID is highlighted yellow. It means, hey, I have a connection coming in to me. Something is driving me. And you can see underneath the duplicator now we have a random behavior. And that's connected, and I always put this in the little square brackets, to the shape ID. Right? So this randomness is going to drive the numerical value of the shape ID. So it's just clicking along saying random this, random this, random that. And again, I covered some of this in that very first tutorial, but if I double click on the random to bring it up in here, you can see that it has a strength. I could turn that off, or I can animate that if I want. I'll just leave that at 100. But most importantly, what we need to look at here is that we have a minimum and a maximum. And you can see we have a far more red ellipses than we have the black stars. And that's because we told it to pick the shape ID. We only have 2 items in here, right? We have item 0 and item 1, or element 0 and element 1. And the shape ID itself is using random. And the default for this is just set to go from 0 to 10. Well, we don't have elements 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So that basically returns I'm assuming in the code, returns a null. It's like, hey, I don't find this. And so it just goes back to 0. And it shows that first element. But if I put this to 1, you can see now we have kind of close to a 50-50. I don't know, I'd have to count them all. Maybe it is a true 50-50. Any number that is 0 to 0.4999 would be considered 0, and anything that's 0.5 and above, all the way up to 1, would translate to 1. So it rounds these off when it needs a whole number as opposed to a fraction. So it does that for us. We actually had to use a little bit of code, a little function to do that for us in open processing. But this can be helpful later on because we could animate these values, and that's what we're going to do in the next little bit. So let's do a little recap, as I always like to do. We have a little overview of the interface. We started creating a few items, and we have added them into the duplicator. You can drop these, so I'm just doing like a hierarchy. If I click and drag, I can just, to clean this up, I'm going to put them in the duplicator. So inside the duplicator, even though it doesn't matter, because we're making the connection, the hierarchy doesn't matter, I put them in there just to clean up my organization. Inside, I'm doing an ellipse shape and a star shape that are being duplicated, and I'm using random to drive this random selection of the shape ID. And we've set those to be 0 to 1, right? Okay, and we talked about how to use the attribute editor to clear items and add items to the mix, right? If we click on them and bring them up. Okay, 21 minutes, almost 22. I'm going to pause on that one, and I'm going to come back in part 2 here in a minute.